So the second panel is going to look at industry resilience and innovation in the face of maritime disruption. That's a good broad subject. And we have, as you know, got two distinguished speakers now sharing their views. Philip Fullerton is Managing Director of Northern Marine, and he joined them in 1995, rising from an engineering cadet to chief engineer. He became superintendent in 2002 and has since held positions as technical director, general manager, and deputy managing director. In 2017, he was appointed managing director. So we're delighted to have Philip here. Professor Ian Gow, who is chairman of the Japan Society of Scotland and has the distinction of having a very fine surname, is chairman of the Japan Society of Scotland and honorary professor of Japanese at the University of Edinburgh. He was awarded the Order of the Rising Sun Gold Rays with Nick Ribbon in 2021 for his contribution to Japan-Scotland relations and Japanese studies. And he has served afloat and has very kindly agreed to talk about the subjects for this particular panel. Ian.
Thank you. Well, I'm delighted to be here. I've known about the Nautical College since the 1960s, and I know now that it is an international centre for excellence teaching and research. I'm particularly pleased also because unlike Lord Robertson, I didn't go to Dunoon Grammar's finishing school, which is called the 4th, 5th and 6th years. I was removed on my 15th birthday, and then I ran away to sea. But after I came out of the Navy and did a small amount of work in shipping and so on, the two companies I worked for were taken over by Americans who said, which degrees do you have? Which qualifications do you have? And I thought, well, I'm not going to watch fast-track graduates go past me here. I'll get an education. And I got my education in the first-class Glaswegian tertiary sector. I was funded by the government to spend a year at Langside College. And I have to say that having spent the rest of my time in universities, the proportion of people that can really teach and care about students in university is very small compared to the superb teaching you get in the tertiary colleges. So I'm absolutely delighted. I'm going to talk about maritime security with regard to the Indo-Pacific. For Britain, of course, it is incredibly important. 30% of our trade is there. And in the future, the Asia-Pacific, we have to get a hold of it and maximize our benefits from it to make a stronger Britain. And that region, leaving aside that it's a powder keg, particularly Northeast Asia, etc., that it is, in that region, there is a key, is that what we might call the coalition of the willing to uphold the rules-based order in that area is absolutely and vitally important. One of the classic examples of the coalition of the willing, of course, was the original trade in the Pacific, the TTP, which Trump 1.0 withdrew on the first day. Biden didn't come in because he wanted an American-led setup. And now, of course, we've got Trump 2.0. And I can assure you that the rules-based order are really concerned about what's going to happen, leaving aside them possibly being recruited in by China. Japan filled the leadership vacancy in terms of, if you like, the rules-based order in the region, particularly Prime Minister Abe, in political and economic terms. So let's leave that aside for the moment. Now, forgive me if I'm reading from notes, because unlike other professors that have appeared here today who look younger than my sons, my synapses don't always work that well these days. So, what is the most significant development in the Indo-Pacific in terms of maritime developments? It's not the second carrier force, task force going to the Far East. That's showing capability, not necessarily intention to be there, as particularly Lord Robertson explained very carefully. My own view is, and it was the same view before Crimea and Ukraine was leave the carrier force to defend us here and take one of the many reserve American carrier task forces and put them out with Korea and Japan, because they're far more interoperable, they've been working with them for years, etc. The major shift in defense terms in the region, in my view, was Prime Minister Abe's shift in Japan's security planning, the self-defense forces. If you like, a neutered form of military organization right up until the 1990s. Completely encompassed, held together and forced not to be able to act well because of its constitutional constraints under interpretations of Article 9. So up until the end of the 1980s, the Maritime Self-Defense Force and of course the Coast Guard were limited to, if you like, spheres of sovereignty. That is to say, territorial waters. Then, in one of the many trips from Washington to say you must pay more for defense, at the end of the 1980s, the sea lane perimeter was expanded to 1,000 nautical miles. That was a deal to contribute to defense. But what's changed after that is quite amazing. Now, it might be of interest to know, because these are directly relevant to some of the areas like satellites and so on. There was no overseas deployment of the SDF, the Self-Defense Forces, until the 1990s, under pressure from the United States in terms of conflicts and, of course, in terms of the United Nations. There was no Ministry of Defense, only a junior ministry until 2014. No participation in collective defense. They keep saying that, but I think that the treaty with America, the United States, is a form of collective self-defense. No power projection capabilities. It now has those. No sharing of defense-related technology, except with America. No exceeding 1% of GMP. Now, never mind whether that figure is correct. That was a policy of continuous governments, and it, of course, is the basis of Trump and others picking up on the fact of the peace dividend, if you like, in terms of the fact that these countries like Japan and Germany had spent less on defense and put their money into commercial development and then attacked the American markets, etc. There's a little bit of truth now. No military use of space until 2008. No foreign aid for military purposes until 2014. Defensive defense. Well, now we have a form of first strike thinking basically approved by the cabinet. The only one that remains is the ban on nuclear weapons. That actually is not based on Article 9. That's based on the article in the Constitution that says that Japan must honor its treaties, and it has signed and ratified the nuclear non-proliferation. But nevertheless, it would be very difficult for them themselves, maybe the allies, but not them, to bring it in. Now, the topic I was asked to comment on today was in terms of industrial innovation, industrial resilience and innovation as it relates to maritime strategy. Now, I suffer because I've read and I've written about these areas of maritime security. I suffer from the same sea blindness that our distinguished speaker just mentioned. I don't recall ever reading about the role of the merchant marine in security issues, because it's true that the Royal Navy defends Britain, but so does the merchant marine. Anyway, I thought that the thing to do would be, if we want to look at industrial resilience and innovation developments, we should look at not just Japan, but South Korea. And I'll come on to that, for pioneering developments in these areas. Now, the Koreans and the Japanese, 99% dependence on the sea. South Korea, 96%. 90% energy dependence by sea. So, and what you see in these countries is they are talking about the fleet, the national fleet. When they're doing this planning, they're not talking about the Maritime Self-Defense Forces. They're talking about the merchant marine. So, in terms of technological leadership in maritime security, we have two countries at the forefront of maritime technology and innovation, South Korea's world-class shipbuilding programs, Japan's advanced maritime monitoring systems, etc. These are all part of that. But they are actually now working closer and closer together. They've had problems. In that triangle, the weak triangle is between Japan and South Korea, with America linked to two of them. Now, the more uncertainty there is in that region, the more close Japan and South Korea are going to move together in terms of their own ability to protect and support the rules-based order. And interestingly, they both, thanks to the UK government, they both now have much stronger agreements with Britain. And I see something of a triangle in maritime supremacy in the region between Britain and them. I think one of the things in terms of Britain is, it reminds me, we've all mentioned some history. When Britain signed the alliance with Japan, it was at the beginning of the century and was getting into, if you like, the arms race with the Germans, etc. The British Admiralty took immediate advantage to start bringing back its best ships and its best staff from the China fleet to focus on the Atlantic. It seems to me that although there is so much that Britain can do out there, it's not going to be about sending lots of ships out there. It's in other areas like cybersecurity and all sorts of other things. So the fact that we now have an extremely sophisticated maritime and air self-defense force that has been liberated from doing things there in the area, then it seems to me that could be that could help with the cost effectiveness of our British strategy in the region. So I'm not going to go into all the bottlenecks. We know about them. The only one I might mention is, since we don't know what's going on, is the American Canal, or as we used to call it, the Panama Canal. So the Japanese, of course, and the Koreans are frightened to death. I mean, Lord Robertson mentioned the Arctic, etc. But they're scared stiff of the routes, and they're now planning an eastern maritime corridor, east of Taiwan through the Philippine Sea, a Philippine corridor option through Philippine archipelagic, I didn't even know there was a word, waters, and the western diversion, South China Sea, completely avoids the Taiwan Strait, etc. Now, all of these cost far more to do, and they take far more time to move what is needed for them and us from the area. So we know that in terms of their dependence on the sea, which is an integrated government. Now, we talk about the shipping companies. These are not shipping companies. The chaebols in Korea and the former Zaibats and Keiretsu organizations in Japan do have a shipping company. But these are holding company structured financial industrial combines where all of them have a giant trading company, all of them have banks, and so on. Now, they're not legally structured often as holding companies, but they're there. And the amount of power that they have, if you think about the Mitsubishis and the Mitsuis and the big Korean companies, that is major resource and skill sets to be able to develop things. Just in passing mention, technological innovations. Let's take Japan. Autonomous ship research, Meguri project. Now, that's actually the big shipping company NSK that everybody thinks. This is a big corporate group. Hydrogen-powered shipping. NYK's Line's pilots using hydrogen fuel cells. Disaster-resistant ports. That's something really important for Britain to know what they are doing. Maritime drone networks and so on. With the Koreans, smart ship development, Hyundai, another big complex. Modular building, Samsung Heavy Industries, part of the Samsung Group. Liquid gas bunkering infrastructure. Integrated port industrial complexes. Now, Don't get me wrong, they're doing a lot, but they have great vulnerabilities in terms of their modernization of their ports and their recruiting of staff, etc., etc. But they can set some global maritime standards. I'm not going to go into them in any detail. I think they're relatively easy to find for people, and I'll certainly be producing a longer written version of this. The thing that I started to get very interested in, because as I say, this whole maritime merchant marine area, I didn't know anything about. So I've actually learned, even at my age, you can learn things. If you look at the Nagoya port terminal system breaches, they matched it to North Korean non-state, but they're state actors. And it's resulted in the Yokohama port authorities, again, suspected Chinese state affiliation. Multiple Japanese ports ransomware, again, that is assumed to be North Korea. South Korea's had the same attacks, especially with Busan, the superport, which on some respects looks like an extremely interesting setup, but in terms of a port, it's major, 6th biggest container port in the world, but its manufacturing is too close to its port. You could take the lot out. And you can take it out electronically, as they've been trying to do. And they got zapped by the North Korean Lazarus group. And then you've got Incheon with the ransomware, et cetera, and then you've got the spoofing and the spear phishing. Now, I didn't know what spear phishing was. Vessels targeting, now this relates, it seems to me, to the force that this college is producing for the future. These are being targeted, the people. Vessels targeting emails crafted to appear from legitimate maritime authorities containing vessel-specific information, call signs, recent port calls, etc., to enhance credibility. Using precise maritime terminology protocols and regular frameworks familiar only to maritime professionals, and timing the operational attacks to coincide with known vessel movements, crew changes, or port calls when recipients might be distracted under pressure, under time pressures, that they won't investigate the email that they get sufficiently. Here's who they're targeting, and these seem to be exactly the people that you're preparing, and I'm sure you're preparing them as well. You're preparing them well. Maritime logistics coordinators, staff managing cargo documentation and customs clearance. And I did think this was significant about the 2 Korean universities producing 500 experts on maritime, cyber, etc. But in fact, they probably aren't as good as what we've got here. But there may be lessons to be learned from it. On environmental, social, and governance, which was a topic that I was asked to look at a little bit, they have actually pioneered green strategic shipping corridors, reducing carbon emissions and vulnerability to oil markets. Because of the tsunamis and the earthquakes, there was a lot of thinking about the infrastructure of the ports, which need updating and need reinforcing. Hyundai's dual fuels vessel strategy explicitly addresses emissions and energy security. And they are selling, the Koreans are selling green vessels as strategic assets with security benefits. It seems to me that the whole area, it's all coming back to the same thing. National security for us, and what will drive us, that is the South Koreans and the Japanese. They're going to spend, and they have got brain power, but they don't have exclusive control of it, but they do have money and resources and a desperate need, which will drive innovation. Our perception of the need, I think, is nowhere near on that level, nor indeed is Europe's. So in all of this, we can't simply rely on the market and shareholders to do the kinds of innovations in merchant marine safety. And I'm sure these are things that this college and its teachers and its students have been telling people. But we need to do more, and we need to start now. So as I say, I think we have to get rid of the sea blindness. The defense of Britain and Europe is as much related to the merchant marine as the Royal. I'm not saying that we can and should use all the information that they've got on developments and everything else, but I do think we can learn from them and we can also collaborate with them. So, as I say, we can't leave it to the market and shareholders in terms of the merchant side. We can't afford to do it alone. And they are potentially good. The combination of South Korean, Japanese, and British brainpower can do an awful lot in these areas, other than, of course, they can build ships very fast and so on. So we need to persuade the government and the Europeans that we need to know more of what they're doing, and we need to know where we can not reinvent the wheel, or we can use them to pressure us into, you know, it'd be very nice if there was in the national budget a column for merchant marine, but there isn't. They're funded from all sorts of different places. So that's all I can really offer, is to say that there is a concentration of power which is directly related to the topic that was selected for today. And for all of those young elite officers that you're training, well, they might end up working in Japanese and Korean ports and research institutes, etc., or on their ships, the national fleets merchant of Japan and Korea. So how's your Japanese and Korean? Because I think you might need it in the future. Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you. So now Philip Fullerton is going to talk to us about his perception of things, and he, as I've mentioned, is Managing Director of Northern Marine.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. Very much looking forward to it all week. I cast my mind back. I started here as a cadet in 1992 as an engineer cadet. I look at the college today. I must say it's extremely impressive what's been achieved. Only thing I would say is, maybe it's a theme for what I'll speak about today, is it is sadly 32 years ago. And it is maybe about, sometimes it's our ability to have transformation and have it at pace. So the follow on from what Lord Robertson said earlier on, his keynote address is extremely difficult in many ways, but there's a lot of themes that maybe come through and shine through in the commercial shipping side of things. We could talk about geopolitics. Lots to be said, very changing circumstance at the moment. But maybe thinking about geopolitics in itself, different areas, different actors come along, but in reality, the presence of such things never goes away. So it's, in some ways, it's trying to, as Lord Robertson explained earlier on, structuring a defence review to take into the uncertainties of the future, albeit it's where the uncertainties are rather than what the uncertainties can be. There is a parallel of replication over the years of the consequence of same. We can also look from a trade disruption point of view and industry reliance. COVID-19 probably signalled the first sign that was mentioned earlier on of the end of globalisation. I think that was probably when lots of countries and supply chains and infrastructure suddenly became aware of the offshoring of industry. And the phrase of nearshoring came to our minds quite quickly. We could say from a manufacturing point of view, a trade point of view, resilience point of view, some of the stuff that we saw as problematic with offshoring of these industries wasn't exactly the most complex or challenging areas of what we needed as a country to achieve our day-to-day ongoing operations. And I think that vulnerability really struck home to us all. So I think, whilst it's maybe not directly due to security that kicked some of this off, but a global pandemic, but really it just rolls into the security and the destabilisation through the geopolitical arena. Climate change also has been another area where we see things. You could say it's twofold. Climate change has had impacts in other countries that then have the needs now for us to look about from a trade and from a logistics delivery resilience point of view. But I think also what was referenced earlier on by Paul when it came to COP26, and we were involved in quite a number of the maritime areas there. I think we'd seen maybe COP26 is moving just away from climate change and also quite heavily touching on global equalisation. And I think this was not just a quest for a decarbonisation future, but it may be a rebalance of the wealth within the global communities. And again, pulling us back into these sorts of areas of the resilience of investments overseas versus requirements at home. Ian also mentioned some of the large Japanese shipping companies. When we speak to them, they're clients of ours. They're logistics providers, they're not shipping companies. And I think that's one of the biggest areas we also have to consider as well, is just shipping plays a part in a logistics chain, and it's not to be seen in isolation from just a delivery point of view. We've also had experience when we've actually had vessels through the Northern Sea Route a number of years ago, before the current changes of geopolitical welcoming and unwelcoming of countries in the area. Again, it has opened up things. We've also given it was mentioned earlier, the ability for the Chinese to have an Atlantic-facing event. But we've driven some of these changes ourselves. And I think that's some of the areas we have to think about as well. I mean, we look at piracy as well, back to the climate change and global equalisation point of view. Some of that has been driven, again, by some of these changes. And a third thing that we've pretty much brought along from our own changes is the dark fleet, which has really been come along through sanction issues that have taken place in the global arena to try and control some of these actors that are deemed unfriendly in the world. So maybe it takes me on my next point. What have we learned? We've learned that some of the challenges have been self-generated, and it's how we react to these now to ensure we've got safe shipping and transportation, and indeed for the protection of all of the crews who sail on these vessels globally. I think we've also learned that there's kind of 4 areas of global hostility or global pressure. With Russia, we've got China, North Korea and Iran. Maybe a lot of these other areas that we've now got some resilience and issues with, whether it's the Houthi rebels in the Red Sea, or what's been happening with Hezbollah and what's been happening with Hamas, etc. I mean, it's proxy wars been set by these 4 areas. So again, I think this proxy element will spread as we look forward. So again, it's where do we, in life, I would always say we limit the amount of gunpowder. Where do we put it? Where do we get our best effect from it? And are we going to try and use all of our security capability from the disruption of maritime activities and give us more reliance in our industry? Is it these 4 areas that we have to focus on? The rest will take care of itself. Who knows? We also speak about the vast oceans to protect. That came in the piracy issues when it first kicked off in the Gulf of Aden and Somalia. The military response to that was slow. It was very ineffective to start with. But you could also say, is it surprising? Vast areas of sea to patrol with very few ships. It's just not what navies are what do you call, designed to put in place to do. They're not police cars travelling around the countryside trying to protect and look for vulnerabilities in our systems. So again, it's trying to understand how we can coordinate these things through different actions to increase our resilience and ensure that the capability for shipping to continue. But that also maybe takes us down to kind of the rules-based society, and the fact that was always what was governed us from what we went through. The kind of move away from that rules-based society by some of these actors is causing us then the disruption globally. UNCLOS was mentioned earlier on, freedom of navigation, key to it, but it's not always what we see. These geopolitical issues do give us changes in this area, and a good example has been over time where Iran has had tit-for-tat issues with other countries' assets when it comes to their continued expectation to freely trade with oil, for example. Back in 2019, one of the Iranian vessels, Grace 1, was trying to deliver oil to Syria. It was stopped in Gibraltar by the UK government. Good, again, back to rules-based society, what can and what cannot be done. But consequently, British ships were then targeted in the Arabian Gulf. And it's despite all of the planning and different things, sadly one of our ships was taken in retaliation to the Grace 1 being taken by the UK government in Gibraltar. And you could say the consequence from that from a geopolitical dispute was tit for tat. You won't let our oil trade, we won't let your oil trade, and we'll take a view on your flags. The consequence from our point of view was on our seafarers on board the ships. And again, it's this unrelated consequence that then takes us through the security side of things and gives us concern and elements of thought process over how we then continue to protect our people and our crews on board our ships. And we had a lot of discussions within Stena at the time when Stena Impero was seized. And we spoke, and it was a point that was mentioned earlier on, was about flags, protection, and all of these things. The ships couldn't trade into the Arabian Gulf. So what's the first thing you think about? You think about, well, do we change flag? Do we pick another, country where we can fly the flag of the vessel and freely trade? Because again, that's what it's about, free trade. However, we took a different view. And we thought, well, no, we're UK flag, and we're UK flag for a reason. And one of the areas we pick a flag is for the ability to get protection, and that protection comes from the Royal Navy. So there is a big thought process when it comes to resilience and disruption about who is actually there to protect us in the end. And I think it's more and more what companies have to think about when it comes to strategies, and again, governments have to think about from a shipping strategy point of view, and indeed to try and promote their own flags, but provide benefit when it comes to that. And that benefit sometimes has to come from taxation, etc., to make the flag appealing on an international standard, but at the same time it has to give these benefits that we need to have to not only protect the trade, the resilience of the trade, but to safeguard the crews on board. Choke points, we mentioned the choke points are the same choke points as what they've been for hundreds of years. I mean, Gibraltar, the Straits of Gibraltar, Hormuz. Then we think about trade versus capability. If Hormuz is such a big area and it's such a big choke point, why don't we just pipe all the oil out to the Arabian Sea side of it and rule out the Arabian Gulf element of it? But again, that's not how markets work. So we've got different dynamics at times that push us into the area. So can we have this ultimate standpoint of hassle-free trade that takes place without any implications or any security concerns? And I think it's just not possible. So we have to then think about what mitigation we put in place to try and allow us to increase our resilience in those areas. But for me, a lot of it comes down to collaboration, and I think it has to be collaboration with like-minded people. I think at times as an industry, we try and collaborate with everybody and try and get the best out of all things instead of maybe choosing our partners wisely, sharing ideas, making sure that collaboration then is for the benefit of a limited number of people. And you could say, well, that's protectionism, but in reality, it's what's possibly needed to try and bypass some of the actors that we know that are causing the global destabilization when it comes to free trade. We also look forward to reading the Strategic Defence Review. I think there's also elements in there where I think we've seen the start of this within the UK government. I think there has been a lot more collaboration with industry from an MOD point of view. I think that's a good thing. There's a mindset within the Royal Navy now to look at commercial shipping to give different ideas for whether it's about utilisation or supporting vessels that are away from the UK coast to try and give a forward persistent presence, which again is all very encouraging, again, as we look to these choke points and areas whereby we need the capability of the Royal Navy to protect the vessels to pass through and continue to work in hostile areas. So there's lots of good things, but I think that shows one part of a strategic defence review. But I do believe that strategic thinking, especially in governments, is lacking. from a long-term point of view. And I think infrastructure and strategic sight for the next number of years is important. I used to look back at my own travels 20 years ago in China versus going to visit there today for work-related things, and the longer-term vision they have is quite striking, whereby some of the spending that we have within shipping or something here is very short-term rather than long-term focused. Just as an example, because it's been talked a lot about today, and I'm being impartial when I mention it, but in the US, what's happening at the moment, and specifically looking to shipping. The President, back to impartial, whether we like the ideas, we don't like the ideas, but the shipping side of things is now very much part of the National Security Council, and it's been housed within the White House. It's a strategic element that they've maybe not seen for many years, but it's come to the forefront of the minds for not only for the capability for trade. Also, you could turn around and say protectionism and defence as well. Their shipping capabilities are extremely low. They've got a lot of issues, a lot of crewing issues, a lot of low skills. The average, if I might dare say, blue-collar American is not desperately well skilled to go ahead when we look at some of their aspirations for shipbuilding, etc. But there is a need for them and for us, both in the UK and the US and other European countries as well, to maybe look at some of the stuff that's actually happening in America, distancing ourselves from some of the parts we don't see as the best route forward to a positive future. But it is about some of the partnerships that they're looking to engage with. I mean, the fact that one of the largest Korean shipbuilders has bought Philly shipyard in America to try and obviously kickstart some form of rapid expansion of UK shipbuilding and US shipbuilding and US capability is extremely encouraging, I think, when we're trying to see how these skills can be left. Whilst we have a good shipbuilding focus point here in the UK, and when Lord Robertson puts it into perspective of the carrier project that was signed off in the late 90s, I mean, you only went to sea 3 years ago. Again, back to the point of our flash to bang is far too slow. And again, from a resilience and disruption point of view, if we need more assets become of a global threat that's causing us difficulties with our ability to trade, again, how can we quickly ramp up some of these things, whether it's traditional ships or new modern types of protection. So again, it's time and impact. I think that's an important point. Whether we like, again, what's happening in America, the president's 4 years, this president's trying to do something in 4 years, as opposed to maybe looking at a longer-term vision that we, maybe in this country, have never managed to fully harness over the periods. So I think from what's happening there is lessons to be learned. But again, it is all about, I think, at the end of the day, of creating a very safe space for global trade and for the people who are engaged in this trade. Thank you.
I wonder if you'd like to comment, just to get some questions going, on what can be done. You talk about the delay in moving forward on projects. What can be done in our society to increase the speed with which these issues need to be addressed?
I think, number one, it's like a lot of these things, it's facing up to the fact that we haven't actually got a problem. And then once we know we've got a problem, it's have a strategy to deal with it. And then I think to advance it and to bring things forward is about collaboration. Collaboration with very similar valued countries globally who then we can bring alliances with to harness not only the benefits we can glean from them, but what we can exchange back to assist them with their developments as well.
Great, good. Questions for Ian Gow and Philip Fullerton? Yes, the gentleman at the back. Could say who you are, please.
Hi, I'm Alistair Ireland. I'm a curriculum head here and a fellow escapee from Dunoon Grammar School, in my case.
Well done.
To run away to sea, in my case, the Royal Navy. Sort of distilling a lot of that, I kind of had a much, much bigger question, but a lot of it's been sort of covered about the time it takes to generate capabilities from defence review to operational capability and so on, against much quicker cycle times for the development of things like AI and cyber and drones and all the rest of it. And I guess the question is, do we have nationally a coherent, reliable military-industrial complex that can respond in the timeframes we need?
From my experience, I would say no. I don't think we've got the sufficient, if you look at naval side of things, shipbuilding capability and competence. We might have great infrastructure. Some of the infrastructure we have for shipbuilding in the UK, when it comes to dry docks and capabilities like that, are a global envy. However, the skills and the capability, the long-term planning, etc., to bring these into full industrial capabilities are far from our grasp.
So what happened? Here we are, sitting by this water, where the majority of the ships in the world were built. And even in Myanmar, which was Burma, known as the Scottish colony, the Irrawaddy River Company of ferries is still run from Glasgow. And those ferries, many of them were built there. So what's happened? Where have we gone wrong? And where have we lost that ability to impact things? Is it because we were bankrupt at the end of the Second World War? Is it because we've never recovered from that? I think these are very important questions, which of course this college is specifically addressing by turning out highly qualified young men and women to function within the Navy.
A part of that, because you inspired me to make a contribution, is I was aware of that Miramar and that Glasgow link just actually quite recently. But it's the point that Philip made is our government, Western governments, are myopic. They don't think long term anymore. So this college is successful because we think in 10 years, 25 years and 50-year time horizons. We're envisioning what City of Glasgow College will look like in 2065 right now. Now we're only one institution, but wouldn't it be good if our government, and more importantly what I mean by our government, our officials who advise our government, wouldn't it be good if they had some training or some expectation to not think beyond a parliamentary term or indeed a short time horizon, but to think as the Chinese think in terms of that kind of even 100 years. So Glasgow as and the UK, I think we're as one of the top 8 cities in the UK, probably I think it's the 5th largest in the UK, Glasgow. Our challenge has been that we are the victim of short-term thinking. We're the victim of expediency, and unfortunately we're the victim a little bit of our success. Glasgow, as a shipbuilding capital, built half all the Merchant Navy ships, half of all the Royal Navy ships plus going forward, but we weren't able to sustain that because the industry became deglobalized. Our governments failed to protect that and the infrastructure needed beyond the short term. And as a result, we're playing catch up. Now, as an institution, we're constantly saying to not just the Scottish Government, but the UK Government, is there any chance of you thinking in the long term? Is there any chance of you investing in the long term? Is there any chance of you having a blueprint in the long term? I think the SDRs are an example of that because they think in 10-year time horizons. But sadly, we went through a period of time when, with 24/7 news, we weren't actually thinking beyond that. And we have a danger here because in more than one occasion I heard everybody talking about, well, what's Trump thinking today? So are we actually going from 24 hours thinking to minutes thinking in terms of that? Because if that's the case, it's the wrong direction of planning.
Yeah.
So I think Glasgow needs to kind of remind the world of our great prowess. And I just want to say, since we have this distinguished audience here today, Glasgow was once wealthier than London because it was 21 days shorter from the Americas to get here.
I want to say something.
And the first monument to the Royal Naval Battle of the Nile, Nelson, wasn't in London with the Trafalgar Square and the monument. It was actually in our park with the obelisk that was put up because our merchants could do that. Our merchants were wealthy. Our merchants traded actually in drugs. Our merchants in Glasgow provides 75% of all of Europe with drugs. And what were they? Sugar, tobacco. Go forward.
Imperial preference helped.
Indeed. So the challenge here is, can we use institutions, I guess, cities like this, to remind others that it's not about minutes and days or parliamentary terms, you know, at some stage and in some industries, and if shipping is part of that, and shipbuilding, let's get back to longer term thinking.
Lord Robertson, are there any grounds for optimism that we can change the way in which we function? Seems to me autocracies who think in the very long term, or to quote the Chinese, I think it was, you have the watches, but we have the time. Is there a way that we can address it? And I know Ian Gow and Kirk want to say something as well.
Well, the SDR will look forward to 2035. And so we're attempting to take a longer term perspective on that and what you build up during that time in order to get back to the war fighting capability that will alone deter. But I share the same pessimism that people have, that we don't think about it. You know, there is one institution in this country which has got multi-party support, stretches across electoral cycles, and costs billions and billions of pounds. Now, when you say that to people and you ask, what is it? Most people don't know, but it is the nuclear deterrent. And it's almost the only thing where, in fact, the country thinks strategically. And some of us, there's a small group of us who are getting together now to try and get strategic thinking into government, you know, building it in, you know, so that civil servants and the rest begin to start thinking about overall strategy. And you know, we're beginning to make progress in that area.
Ian, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to what we were talking about earlier. I mean, obviously, I am aware that a great Chinese statesman, when asked what he thought of the French Revolution, said, too early to tell, too early to tell. You know, they're long-term planners, they say. But my view at the moment is that there may be a way to prioritize the merchant side of all of this and the ports and so on. There's this unique moment where we are now facing the Russians getting everything they want and with ambitions for the rest of Europe, and with what the Japanese and others always feared, the abandonment of almost Europe for our own self-defense. Now that is a critical change, and it seems to me that that can be used to say, we are not going to change the nature of politics, it seems to me. But what we can do is to say, here is a critical event where suddenly we have to start thinking the same way as the Japanese and the Koreans, and that let's get the Navy sorted out, which is, I mean, you'll be hoping that it's never known as the Lord Robertson Report because it's successful. And I think it's going to be successful. But I think if we get that right, then we use the event to say, wait a minute, what about the merchant navy and the ports and everything else? Because believe you me, the non-state actors, most of whom are not really non-state, the hackers and so on and so forth, people like Putin are going to disrupt. We can pray for a change in America from it's heading towards a combination of an autocracy and a plutocracy of a certain kind. I think that the fact that we are, to some extent, being abandoned from our principles in Europe by these two men. I mean, NATO is going to become no Trump Atlantic Treaty Organization. So I think that we can use the event to say, okay, we think we got it clear on the Navy. Now, is there anything? Let's look again now at our dependence as an island nation. I mean, I know that South Korea is not an island. It's a peninsula, but the other bit of it is sitting waiting for the North Koreans. So I think that the next step would be for those people who are central to the development of the merchant marine and all of its needs and so on, need to start now talking to the right people in the right government areas to move forward. We can use the event. I don't think we can change the nature of politics short term. Because look at what we're facing. Talk about short term. It's a 12-hour cycle. You know, when Trump's asleep, we might know where to start until he wakes up. So I just think we should use the opportunity that if we've sorted out the naval side, that is the Royal Naval side, etc., and indeed the Air Force and other things, I think that then we use this event of the crisis being created in European security by Trump and Putin, and we say there is another dimension to this which we perhaps now have to start looking at. And that's where probably institutions like yourself, Principal, are going to have to work hard and lobby. And you know some important people. I mean, there's one sitting beside you.
Ian, thank you. Kirk, I think, has a question. No, it's not. Who's that? Yeah.
I just probably want to say it's probably one of the final things we should maybe think about is that thinking has actually been happening. I just want to advertise a very small group of people who work in the Defence Concepts and Doctrine Centre in Shrivenham. And I know Lord Robertson and his team will have read this document at length. It's Global Strategic Trends out to 2050. Previous iterations of that document predicted the rise of Al-Shabaab, piracy, the global migration crisis in the Mediterranean, the global rise of populist politics and moving away from Western ideals and democracy. All of that was written in previous iterations of that document, but tying into what Philip Fullerton has talked about, our ability to react to those predictions is not appropriate. But all we need to do is read that document out to 2050, realise what those problems are now, and start dealing with them. And then we may have fewer problems in the future to worry about. But I would commend that document to you. Global Strategic Trends out to 2050.
Is that available to the general public?
You Google that and it will pop up, and it's an incredibly interesting document to read.
Yeah, good. Any other observations before we close up? Yes.
Hi, I'm Eleanor. I'm a student rep for the ASI. I actually have a question for kind of everyone who's spoken today. Thank you to all of you. And so you've all highlighted in different ways the importance of defence. And my question is less about changing capabilities, more about changing attitudes. I think for a lot of young people, despite the importance of defence, it remains incredibly unattractive. The idea of, you know, a government that wants to increase defence spending, or a political party that's advocating increased defence spending is not one that young people want to vote for. The idea of signing up to the military, whether that's the Navy, merchant Navy, is often seen as borderline unethical. And so, so you highlighted a sort of strategic gap in terms of recruitment and all this sort of thing. So I was just wondering, how do you, before you begin to think about changing, capabilities, how do you actually incentivize people to join up to give you that capability in the first place?
Who would like to answer that amongst the panellists?
You highlight again, one of the hardest things is as you say, take ethics. And across all student populations, across many universities, colleges and other education institutes, it's quite clear that young people and those that come back into education have a vastly different ethic now than they ever had before. That sometimes comes from where they've come from, it's from their global outreach and what they see in the world. Defence, in our terms, we look at the merchant navy as a supply chain. You look at that as feeding the world, making sure that the world has what it needs. And I think most of you all have a mobile phone in your pocket that's come from China or that area. Most of you will have goods, you're wearing clothes that have come from around the world. So for me, it's maintaining that ability for us to trade, and trade brings collaboration. And what that means then is we're globally connected, right? And I think young people that want to worry about the ethics need to look at that and think, it's connecting the world, the defence of that and the ability to secure that.
then means that ethically it's an excellent industry to be part of, whether in the Defence and the Royal Navy or whether in the Merchant Navy itself, moving those goods. Big thing that anybody wants to think about when they come into this industry though is how we sustain it in a way that it doesn't bring the world down in the sense of climate or pollution and other things like that. And so that's the bit where we all need to work, the education's working hard along with industry such as Philip and his team as to how we make it more ethical in the sense of sustainability and how we do things in a clean and greener way. And I think young people need to come in and help us do that. And with those ethics in their head and with those ethics in their heart, if that makes sense. So we want more people to think of this as an industry we should come into because we can then safeguard and collaborate around the world. Did you want to speak?
Did you want to say something? Paul?
Yeah, on the terms of recruitment,
Thank you.
This was very surprising when I was told this. And it's less applicable to the professionals that you're training, but they have to manage crews, etc. And one of the biggest problems that some people are saying is that you won't join the Royal Navy because you have to give up your mobile phone. I mean, you know, these are people addicted to the internet. And I mean, it sounds surprising, but this is a view held by quite a lot of naval officers, is that the minute that they realize, and it would apply to the merchants as well, you know, are you going to dare to risk having mobile phones that are hacked and so on? The earlier question about the military-industrial complex, I deliberately didn't, because I was just trying to make an impression about the potential. There is one danger from Japan for the British military-industrial complex. We know that they're talking, and the Ministry of Defence are talking, about the fact that we can use the defence industries to help rebuild Britain in the best way. But Japan has released its defence industry from the manacles. It wasn't allowed to build weapons, etc. It did get by on dual applications technology, but in the whole of Southeast Asia, if that is our market, we better find a way through joint ventures to be working with the Japanese in that area, because if we don't, they'll take the area. Now, I'm not saying that in a negative sense. It's naturally what they would do. They've already shown themselves to be rather naive. They lost out to the French and so on in terms of negotiation. But they are now free to develop a defence industry in the best possible way to help South and Southeast Asia. But if these are markets where we are still looking, then we better get into bed with the Japanese. Not the South Koreans, because they weren't held back. But the Japanese defence industry is going to rapidly expand. And we better be in, I would almost say, the carrier that's most important is think of Japan as a carrier to the region and get our defence industry aboard the carrier with joint ventures, etc. Just a thought.
Ian, would you like, sorry, Paul, would you like to make your comments and just give us a closing to close this off? Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
If you want to come up here.
Just on that last point. That was a fantastic question, and thank you for asking it. And I think that's why we've included cadets and younger people in the room, so that we're asking better questions. Now, the challenge to the question you posed is really twofold. One, if a whole range of industries, and this college supports 230, shipping is one, shipbuilding is another, creative industries a third, financial services fourth, etc., etc. So it's exactly the same issue in nearly every other industry. Most other industries are not attractive to young people. So the responsibility of the chief executives and the boards is to understand that, and if you're going to attract them, make yourself more attractive by your conditions, the role models that you send out to encourage young people, the remuneration, etc., etc. However, the flip side of that is we obsess too much with the young. It might seem odd for an educator to say that, but let me give you a statistic. If we took every university, every college, every apprenticeship provider in the United Kingdom, and there's about 600, the output from that combined education world refreshes our workforce by only 2.5% every year. Only 2.5% every year. Now that's profoundly shocking until you think that every year we ignore 97.5% of the workforce. There is no upskilling, there is no reskilling, there are no development of role models and mentoring for those that could come into the workforce. So we need to understand that and do something about it. So that's a bit of an answer to that two-part question. Roddy, I said earlier on we need to make this an annual event. By our questions, we could be here by 6 o'clock. We still would be asking more questions. So I think we've got some fresh ideas about what may be the agenda. I hope Lord Robertson will keep in touch and where possible, pop in, give us more keynotes, maybe when it's published, and get some reaction. You can actually tell us is it the Robertson Review or not? I hope it is not. But I'd like to thank you, Roddy, and Asian Institute, Scotland Asian Institute, to help us co-host this, to all those that have helped organise it, to our brilliant speakers, our panellists, to Lord Robertson, but also to you who have given your time today. I know some of you here are in and around Scotland and the area, and it's probably easier to travel, but I also know some of you have made a distance to get here, so I want to thank you for that. And all I'll say is that we hope to produce something from this. Chris and his team will help distill that, probably put it on our website and make it available, because Kirk's right. The more we have open source material, the more we are fulfilling our job to educate. We never make any grand titles to educate the world. We just try and make a title to let learning flourish. And I think we've done that today. I've earned my corn, so to speak. But I think what you're starting to realise is that maritime security is understudied, under-discussed, under-researched, but is hugely important as a bedrock issue to us all. So we want to keep that to the fore, along with all the other issues that we often engage in this college. Every month, every 2 months, we have a seminar, so keep in touch with our website, and there may be other areas that you could be of interested in too. So thank you all for coming. Safe travels home, and as we say here in Glasgow, haste ye back. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.